racism I have experienced, I have experienced racism, comes from the modern left at a scale unimaginable, because I think they feel a sense of betrayal, saying that you're not speaking in the tone that you're supposed to. You literally did. So Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, I believe not in putting words in anybody else's mouth. I believe taking people at their own terms on their own words. Right? So I don't believe in straw men. Ayanna Pressley, she's in the Congress today. She's a member of the squad. Her words, not mine. We don't want any more black faces that don't want to be a black voice. We don't want any more brown faces that don't want to be a brown voice. Literally word for word. I'm not putting any words in anybody's mouth. Ibram Kendi wrote the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. I wrote Woke Inc. It was a pretty successful book. His sold more copies than mine. Here's what it says. Opening lines. The remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. So the other side will gaslight you when you say this stuff. It's like, oh, you're just making that critical race theory stuff up. No. These aren't my words. These are the words of the modern grand wizards of the modern KKK. Really.
What's going on, everyone? Sauce Queen here today, and this is going to be a good one today. So, Vivek's going viral again. There's a video going around where Ibram X. Kendi and Ayanna Pressley, if I remember the names correctly, about their comments about, we don't need black voices, black people, black faces not speaking for black voices and all this nonsense. And I kind of agree with his synopsis of them being part of a modern version of the KKK. As y'all probably know, I'm conservative. I don't agree with majority of black people when it comes to a lot of issues. And this is kind of, I always vision, this is kind of what happens when you leave the Democratic political plantation, is that just because the black Democrats are the majority in the black community, for some reason they want to flex their tyranny of the majority on black people that don't see it their way, right? And this is, I've been my experience growing up. Like, I've always been challenging the norms, or I question the narratives that are always spewed in the black community. Like, all the biggest problems in the black community is racism. But then when I walk down the street, the main person I'm worried about is another black man, because black on black crime is like the more likely thing to happen to a black man than some white supremacists coming out of the woodworks and doing something bad to you, right? And I always took issue with that synopsis of, if I don't say a certain thing, then I ain't black, right? And it's the same thing what Joe Biden said to what's his name? I forgot the guy's name again. Charlemagne. Now, if you have a struggle between voting for me or Donald Trump, then you ain't black. And that's the perception in the black community. And I like it how the left-wing media doesn't have issue with Pressley saying this stuff. They don't have issue with Ibram X. Kendi saying that future discrimination is the only cure for past discrimination. The problem with that statement is the people who discriminated against black people in the past are not the ones being discriminated today in the future, right? And that's the problem. You're pretty much giving a punishment to people who had nothing to do with the past discrimination before. And that's my biggest problem with all this race hustler stuff, is that it keeps making black people look back when, hey, you wasn't there, you wasn't with me shooting in the gym. You were in there when 1960s. Many people who are claiming about systematic racism, they wasn't dealing with it in 1960. But yet here today, they want to benefit off the suffering of their ancestors. And this is been my biggest point about all this race hustler stuff, is that, hey, show me a law that discriminate me based on the color of my skin. You can't. So the only way they can claim racism is disproportional outcomes. And my argument to disproportional outcome is, hey, cause and effect. What are the cause of these disproportional outcomes? It's not your skin color, right? But I digress. On this next clip, Vivek's going to get confronted with this question. And first, it starts off about white supremacy, and I'll give my thoughts after the clip. But this is in following the Jacksonville shooting that happened in Dollar Tree, close to, is in my state, so I'm aware of it. And she's going to press him about, do you think racism played an issue with this shooting? Let's take a look and see how Vivek answered it. But she's mostly using that as a backdrop to make a politicized point about white supremacy. Let's take a look.
I've never once encountered that yet. I'm sure the boogeyman white supremacist exists somewhere in America. I've just never met him. Never seen one. Never met one in my life, right? Maybe I'll meet a unicorn sooner, and maybe those exist too.
So just because somebody hasn't encountered one doesn't mean that the notion of white supremacy doesn't exist as a threat in America. What do you think goes through the minds of the families of the 3 victims in yesterday's shooting when they hear you say that white supremacy is basically a fantasy?
I'm sure they're grieving for their loss, and I don't want to politicize those victims. Dana, this is a very sensitive situation where we should have nothing but foremost respect for those victims and not bring them into partisan politics. But I was responding to a question where someone asked me, what racism have I experienced in recent years? And I answered honestly. Most of that racism has come from the modern left. It's happening during the course of this campaign. Kara Swisher calling me Ramaswamy the other day and reveling in making twists of my last name. People effectively reducing me to the color of my skin and my attributes. That comes today from the modern left. But the reality is,
do you
this is
acknowledge,
part of
though,
a
that
dogma
white
in this country.
supremacy does still exist in the United States?
I acknowledge that all forms of racial animus exist in the United States, including fringe branches. I mean, that's clearly what was at the head of this mentally deranged individual responsible for this shooting, yes. But I think there are many forms of mental derangement that cause us to see one another on the basis of our skin color and our attributes.
The questions I have for the Dana Bush woman, or Bash, if I remember her name correct. Sorry, look, guys, you already know my thing. I'm bad with names to a point. And her argument saying that, just because you never experienced racism doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Well, I could flip it, inverse theory, right? You can, just because you experience racism doesn't mean you can claim that it exists at a broader level, right? I could throw the argument right back at her. And that's kind of my point too. Just because you experience something doesn't make it true for the general population. If a woman dated 10 men and all the men cheated on her, men are trash, men are this, you won't take her advice seriously. You won't take her perspective seriously. And that's how I see racism in a similar manner. Right? You have to demonstrate it to me. It can't be something that's just based solely on your lived experience. Right? That's anecdotal evidence. If we're supposed to take back, because you're a black person, I'm supposed to just assume that you actually experience racism. How I know you're not using it as some form of social currency? How I know you ain't using the claim to appear virtuous or I had a harder life than you, right? Because there's a lot of these games that's being played in our society today where everyone's trying to show themselves to be the biggest victim. They've been victimized the best, the greatest, the most, right? And I think a lot of this is spewing from this racial division that we have in our country is that a lot of people, we're like the left is bringing back segregation. The left is bringing back, black graduations only, black national anthem. The left is going back to their playbook because at the end of the day, look, the KKK was founded by the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is the one that nationalized segregation from the federal government level. Look at Woodrow Wilson, arguably the most racist president in U.S. history. Democrat. Who endorsed that man, right? All the black progressives are going to get mad at me, but this is the facts. W.E. Du Bois endorsed President Woodrow Wilson. And then Woodrow came in, and this is the reason why I don't trust black progressives as much. I don't trust progressives at a detailed level because the main reason that why W.E. Du Bois endorsed Woodrow Wilson when he was running against Theodore Roosevelt was the fact that he was mad that Theodore Roosevelt made Booker T. Washington the first black man to sit in the White House. And W.E. Du Bois felt like he should have been the one to be going to the White House. So out of spite, he endorsed Woodrow Wilson. And you see what happened. When you endorse people based on emotion.
You took issue with comments from Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. She reportedly said, quote, "We don't need any more brown faces that don't want to be a brown voice." About that, you said, "These are the words of the modern grand wizards of the modern KKK." You know, I'm sure, the KKK was responsible for more than a century's worth of horrific lynchings, rapes, murders of black people. How in any way are the views you're talking about comparable to the views and atrocities committed by the KKK?
What I said is the Grand Wizards of the KKK would be proud of what they would hear her say because there's nothing more racist than saying that your skin color predicts something about the
You
content
didn't
of your
just say
viewpoints
that. You
or
didn't
your
just say they
ideas.
would be proud. You said these are the words of the modern grand wizards of the modern KKK.
It is the same spirit. You're right about that, Dana. I think it is the same spirit to say that I can look at you and based on just your skin color, that I know something about the content of your character, that I know something about the content of the viewpoints you're allowed to express. For Ayanna Pressley to tell me that because of my skin color, I can't express my views, that is wrong. It is divisive. It is driving hate in this country. This is dividing our country to a breaking point.
I completely agree with Vivek on this one, right? It is completely wrong to say to somebody, just because they don't agree with you, that they can't speak, oh, you don't speak for black people. Okay, I was never speaking for black people in the first place. I was speaking for myself, just like you're speaking for yourself. But you claim you're speaking for black people. You don't represent all black people. Just like, right? That's the same comments. That's the same kind of comments that I get from so-called black liberals in my comment section, so-called black progressives in my comment section. But then if I two-way, because that's my main premise is it's a two-way street. Whatever criteria you're judging me on, I'm allowed to judge you by the same criteria. And if you're a hypocrite with your criteria, then I can just dismiss you. Hey, you don't speak for all black people. I speak for 90% of them. That's the majority. Okay, just because the majority doesn't make it right. The majority opinion was that black people were property. Black people weren't human, right? Would you have agreed to that position back then? No, you wouldn't. So just because you're the majority does not make you correct. And it seemed like for the black Democrat, for the black liberal, for the black progressives, they don't care about what's true or what is the real solutions that will address real problems in the black community. All they seem like they care about is making all black people conform to a certain vision of the world, a certain view of the world, that racism is the biggest problem in their lives. Hate to break it to you, it ain't. It's like last on the list. If you had a list of 100, Candace Owens' point, if you had a list of 100, racism wouldn't even make the list. Because even in the 1920s, when racism was at its highest, black people was at their most successful economically. You had ex-slaves dying as millionaires. We had our own we had group economics working at its peak. Right? Black people were so well off, so successful without white people that white Democrats had to go in and destroy their marketplace in Tulsa, and they still rebuild it. But what happened? What caused black people to get to the position it is now? Welfare, war on poverty. The legislation they were so happy about, the guy they were so happy about, Lyndon B. Johnson. I'm going to have these ninjas voting Democrat for 200 years, for the next 200 years. Guy who allegedly might have been part of the KKK. And he gave you little war on poverty, right? Good and bad, road to hell's paved with good intentions. He was pushing the welfare program on black women. They had organizers going in and letting women know, oh, your man can't be in the house though. And black women made that choice. Show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. If you're incentivizing people to be single mothers, you'll get more of that behavior, positive reinforcement. But black people don't see it that way because they benefited immediately. The current generation benefited from that policy, but then it left the future generation worse off. And I think this is what happened in the black community, that we're a very self-centered and selfish community. We care about what benefits us now, despite the effects it will have in future generations. And that kind of selfishness will always bring a community down. And that's my argument. That's my main argument of why I don't go along with none of this race narrative stuff, because I know what's in it for you. Abram X. Kennedy, if black people didn't believe that racism was a big problem in your life, you wouldn't have your books wouldn't sell as well. It's a hustle. Abram X. Kennedy is incentivized to have racism still exist, because without racism, he wouldn't be selling his books. That's a conflict of interest. But do black people look at Abram X. Kennedy like he's putting up a hustle? No. It's because because they're falling into confirmation bias. But when little old me come out here and criticize or disagree with the narrative is, or how a black man's supposed to think about these issues, they want to go in my comment section and call me a coon. It seems like for the liberal, coon simply means anyone that disagrees with me. That's what coon means to them. Right? I mean, you can tell me if I'm wrong or if I'm lying in the comment section, but I want to give up to this final clip with Abram X. Kennedy reacting to Vivek comments towards his quote about reverse discrimination. Let's take a look.
The remedy for past discrimination is present discrimination. The remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination, end quote. This is from your book. Ramaswamy says that's racism. Explain.
Well, in the book, actually, I define discrimination, and I go to great lengths talking about a scenario in which, for instance, during the COVID 2020, during the COVID pandemic, it was important for us to provide vaccine first for elderly people because they were the most likely to be dying as a result of COVID 19. That can be described as age discrimination, but it actually was an equitable policy that saved lives. And similarly, when Black people are deprived and have been deprived for centuries of rights and resources, how else are we going to create equity if not providing specific resources and rights to them? But of course, that's described as racism, which to me is very different than depriving people of rights, which is the problem we were talking about to begin with.
I believe that's a flawed argument, right? To say that, oh, we discriminate based on age. No, we didn't. No, like, oh, we say, hey, like, because end of the day, it was a scientific. We had evidence to back up that assumption that we had about the elderly people. Who dies at a disproportional rate with COVID? It was elderly people. Elderly people die most times, are most vulnerable to medical issues because they've been alive longer, right? They have a weaker immune system. Their body's not at full capacity. Young people are less prone to these things, but you still were forcing vaccines on the young people, even though they weren't affected by it, right? And disease is something outside of society's control for the most part, right? So his prescription for how you say it, the Black community is not correct, because at the end of the day, the Black community didn't get here because of some discrimination that happened in the past, right? I already showed you the evidence. If you look back when Booker T. Washington was alive, well, Black people were being successful. Black people were actually able to educate themselves, all without the help of liberals, all without political incentives from the government, when the government was somehow still neutral or against them, right? Black people were thriving and succeeding because they had that spirit of self-reliance. Hey, our power is within ourselves. Let's go build our own communities. Let's shelter each other from the chaos in the South, the democratic South. If you look at the current environment, there's nothing really holding Black people back. The only thing that's holding them back is their culture that incentivizes them to have different skills and different approaches to life. The Black culture, does the Black culture push you to be an engineer, doctor, lawyer? Or does the Black culture push you to be a rapper, athlete, or musician, or anything in the entertainment sphere? What you get more social clout for? What do you get more social recognition for in the Black community? If you become a doctor, do people pat your back and say, oh my God, you're a doctor, that's amazing? Or people will be more excited for you to being a rapper, athlete, or entertainer, or famous person, right? Our culture, this is my biggest argument. Behaviors drives outcomes, right? We get the dude that been to prison more positive recognition than a dude that went to Harvard. That's a fact. No one can argue with me on that. That's a fact. Right? Oh my God, my boy, Mickey didn't do it. Right? Free my boy Mickey. Right? And it's glamorized. You can see it in the movies that's portrayed about Black culture. That lifestyle is glamorized. And with the young people who are impressionable, see that? Whatever your culture lifts up, you get more of. And that's been my biggest problem in the Black community. It's not political power that's affecting the Black community. It's cultural power that affects the Black community. And I did a live stream on Friday. Politics is a downstream of culture. So whatever your culture is will incentivize what kind of policies you want. And this is why we worry more about Black criminals who disproportionately commit crime. This is why they're disproportionately in prison. But we don't care about the Black victims of those violent crimes, because just like black criminals are disproportionately represented in prison, Black victims are also disproportionately represented in crime as victims of crime. But no one cares about the Black victims that are affected by Black on Black crime. And that's a big point that conservatives have. But it's funny how no one ever recognized that. They want to look for confirmation bias. They want to look for the rare instance where a white person do something to black people and they want to say hate crime. But if you look at the crime statistics, Black people commit more hate crime to white people more than white people commit to Black people. 85% of the time. If you want to consider hate crime interracial crime. I mean, I digress. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. You agree, disagree? I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. I really do appreciate you guys for watching to the end of the video, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.